History has witnessed countless wars. In most, the larger army emerges victorious. But do you know the miraculous story of how just 13 ships crushed one of the most powerful navies the world has ever seen? On one side, 300 Japanese warships filled the horizon with advanced weaponry. On the other, a mere 13 broken Korean vessels, short on arms and men. Any ordinary commander would have surrendered at that moment, but that is where the tactical mastermind, Admiral Yi Sun-sin, rewrote history. Today, we dive into the hidden layers of this legendary battle, where intellect, strategy, and the forces of nature made the impossible possible. This wasn't just a fight, it was a final stand for a nation's survival. But how did such a massive fleet reach Korea's shores? What was Japan's terrifying ultimate goal? To understand that, we must go back in time. We are talking about the year 1592. Back then, Japan was ruled by a highly ambitious leader named Toyotomi Hideyoshi, whose grand dream was to bring all of Asia under his feet. On that journey to conquer China, the first obstacle in Japan's way was Korea. Japan stormed the Korean shores with a naval force more terrifying than anything the world had ever seen. This invasion, known in history as the Imjin War, literally suffocated Korea. Thousands of ships carrying advanced firearms and battle-hardened samurais turned Korean cities into ashes one by one. Initially, the Korean army was completely helpless. Their fortresses fell, and even the capital, Hanyang, modern-day Seoul, was captured by the enemy. In those dark days, when the nation stood on the brink of a total collapse, the brave commander, Admiral Yi Sun-sin, stepped onto the scene with his extraordinary intellect. Under his leadership, the Korean Navy delivered unexpected blows to Japan. But amidst these victories, destiny had a trap waiting for him. There were people inside the Korean court more dangerous than the enemies on the battlefield. They feared Yi's rising power and poisoned the king's mind against him. As a result, the hero who saved the nation was imprisoned. He was subjected to brutal torture and deep humiliation. In Admiral Yi's absence, another commander took charge of the Korean Navy, but it ended in a massive catastrophe. In the Battle of Chilcheolyang, the Korean Navy was almost completely wiped out. Hundreds of ships sank to the depths of the sea. With the Korean seas under Japan's total control, the nation was fighting for its last breath. All that remained were just 13 broken ships. At that moment, when the world thought a comeback was impossible, the king called Admiral Yi back once again. But what could he possibly do with these 13 ships? When Admiral Yi was released from prison, all he saw were the ashes of his dream, the Korean Navy. The ships he had built with years of sweat and toil were now at the bottom of the sea. Even his enemies believed a comeback was impossible. Even King Senjo was terrified by this devastation. Certain that these 13 vessels could never face over 300 enemy ships, the king sent an official order to Yi: disband the navy and merge the remaining soldiers with the army. In essence, the king's decree was to abandon the sea forever and retreat. But that is when Yi gave the famous reply that changed the course of history. He humbly told the king, "My lord, I still have 12 ships left." These words were not just an answer, they were a grand declaration. It was the determination of a warrior unwilling to bow before the enemy. He looked at his soldiers. They were terrified. Before them was a sea full of Japanese ships, and behind them a broken nation. To them, he said, "Those who seek death shall live, those who seek life shall die." He immediately began repairing those 13 ships to make them battle-ready. Every vessel was packed to its limit with weapons and ammunition. However, he knew all too well that weapons alone would not win this war. To defeat the world's largest navy, he needed an extraordinary strategy. That is why he chose a specific location, the Myeongnyang Strait. What was so special about this place? How did he turn the world's most terrifying whirlpools into his own weapon? Let's dive into the secrets of that master plan. The question before Admiral Yi was simple: how to defeat 300 ships with just 13. In the open sea, Japan would surround and destroy the Korean forces in seconds. Therefore, Yi's main strategy was to lure the enemy into his own territory. He chose the Myeongnyang Strait. Looking at a map, it's a narrow passage. By luring the enemy here, their 300 ships wouldn't be able to attack all at once. Through that narrow gap, ships could only pass in a single line. His calculation was brilliant. He wouldn't have to fight 300 at once, but only the 5 or 10 ships that appeared directly in front of him. But a narrow passage wasn't Yi's only secret. Beneath that strait lay a terrifying reality. It was a place with some of the fastest ocean currents and whirlpools in the world. Every 3 hours, the direction of the tide would shift violently. The terrifying sound of water crashing against the rocks could be heard kilometers away, earning it the name the Roaring Strait. Yi calculated the timing of those currents with absolute precision. He was certain the Japanese forces, unaware of the sea's temperament, would charge into this death trap with arrogance. His master plan was simple. His ships would stand with the current, while the Japanese ships would be forced to fight against it. He decided that to defeat the enemy, swords and cannons alone were not enough. Geography and nature itself had to be forged into a weapon. This single decision changed the course of that global war. But let's look at what technique he used to control his own ships in such a terrifyingly fast current. The very name Myeongnyang Strait means the roaring sea. There, the water flows at a speed of over 5 meters per second. This is 10 times faster than a normal ocean current. Yi decided to turn this very current into his primary weapon. But he knew that a mere current alone wouldn't be enough to stop 300 ships. To achieve this, some historical records suggest he employed an extremely dangerous tactic: iron chains. He hid massive iron chains underwater across both sides of the strait. As the Japanese ships rushed in at high speed, tightening these chains would cause the hulls to crash and break, or force the ships to collide with one another. Furthermore, the Japanese ships had a major disadvantage. They were built with V-shaped hulls. While this was great for speed, these ships easily lost control when caught in powerful waves and whirlpools like those of Myeongnyang. In contrast, the Korean ships were U-shaped, flat-bottomed vessels known as panoxion. These were designed to remain far more stable in shallow and turbulent waters. The strategy was to turn the enemy's strength into their own weakness. Japan's massive numbers were about to become their greatest burden. Admiral Yi was certain that when 300 ships crowded into that tiny space, the speed of the current would cause them to lose control and collide one after another. But for these tactics to succeed, his soldiers needed nerves of steel. If they felt fear at the sight of that massive enemy fleet, everything would fall apart. The tactics were ready and the traps were set, but one major problem remained: human fear. The soldiers with Admiral Yi were ordinary people. Their hearts sank when they saw 300 Japanese ships lined up to the horizon. They believed failure was certain and death was right before their eyes. On the night before the battle,
Admiral Yi gathered all his soldiers. It was there that he uttered those historic words: "Those who seek death shall live, those who seek life shall die." This was not just advice, he was making them realize that there was no other way out. To overcome their fear, he gave them a purpose greater than fear itself, the survival of their nation. He instilled in them the thought that while retreating meant certain death, fighting on could perhaps turn them into legends. He made one more psychological move. The Japanese army didn't know the actual strength of the Korean forces. To exploit this, he asked local women and children to climb the hills, dress in military uniforms, and wave torches. From a distance, the Japanese would think a massive Korean army was standing guard on the mountains. This psychological warfare to break the enemy's confidence was astounding. The night passed. As the sun rose at dawn, the Japanese ships appeared at the edge of the strait. 133 warships directly in front, backed by around 200 support ships. The Korean soldiers were terrified by the sight. The entire sea was covered with Japanese flags. As soon as the battle began, an unbelievable thing happened. The other 12 ships with Admiral Yi retreated out of pure fear. Seeing that massive enemy lineup, they didn't have the courage to move forward. And so, at the center of the strait, Admiral Yi's flagship stood alone before 133 ships. But Yi did not retreat. He ordered his ship's cannons to fire. The Korean cannons fired relentlessly at the Japanese ships. Every shot was accurate. Japanese ships began to break apart. Seeing their commander fighting alone, the ships that had retreated were inspired. They slowly returned to the battlefield. At this moment, the nature of the sea began to change. The moment Admiral Yi had been waiting for finally arrived. The direction of the ocean current shifted. Powerful waves and currents surged directly towards the Japanese ships. They lost all control. The vessels began to collide with one another and spinning helplessly in the whirlpools. Admiral Yi seized this opportunity perfectly. He moved his ships in harmony with the current. The Korean ships sliced through the Japanese lines as they advanced. Even the ship of the Japanese commander, Kurishima Michifusa, was destroyed. When the Korean soldiers saw his body floating in the sea, they pulled it ashore. The death of the enemy commander completely shattered the morale of the Japanese army. As the battle reached its peak, the very phenomenon Admiral Yi had accurately predicted occurred. By afternoon, the direction of the flow in the Myeongnyang Strait reversed. The powerful waves that had been against the Korean ships were now crashing violently against the Japanese fleet. In that current, moving at over 10 miles per hour, the Japanese ships lost control and began to spin in circles. All 133 ships that entered one after another became trapped in that narrow passage. Ships trying to retreat collided with those moving forward, turning the strait into a massive traffic jam. That was when Admiral Yi fully unleashed his Whirlpool Strategy. The Korean soldiers tightened the iron chains hidden beneath the water. The Japanese ships rushing in with the current had their hulls smashed against these chains. One by one, the vessels began to capsize and sink. At this moment, the Korean ships launched fire arrows from their cannons. Since the Japanese ships were made of wood, they caught fire instantly. The entire strait was filled with burning ships and thick smoke. Panic-stricken Japanese soldiers jumped into the sea, but in those terrifying whirlpools, they couldn't even swim. Panic spread through the Japanese ranks once word reached them that their commander, Kurishima, had been killed. One of the world's most formidable navies began to flee before a mere 13 ships. The Korean forces pursued and attacked the scattered vessels. The greatest upset in modern naval history was unfolding right there. In just 3 hours, the tide of the war had completely turned. That strait became a graveyard for the Japanese army. However, the statistics following this victory were what truly shocked the world. The outcome of this battle was something that stunned historians and military experts alike. Out of the 133 Japanese ships that directly entered the battle, 31 were completely destroyed and sank to the bottom of the sea. Over 100 other vessels suffered severe damage and were forced to retreat. Records suggest that approximately 8,000 Japanese soldiers were killed. With the death of their top commander, Kurishima Michifusa, the morale of the Japanese Navy was utterly crushed. But what amazed the world even more than the victory itself were the statistics on the Korean side. Out of those 13 ships under Admiral Yi's leadership, not one single one was destroyed in this battle. Yes, you heard that right. Admiral Yi achieved this legendary victory without losing even one Korean vessel. On his side, only about 10 to 15 soldiers were killed. This victory was more than just a matter of numbers. It changed the very destiny of Korea. As Korea regained control of the seas, Japan could no longer transport food and weapons to its land forces. Their supply line was completely severed. With this, Japan's grand dream of conquering China came to a permanent end. On one side, 300 ships, on the other, a mere 13. Admiral Yi proved to the world that intellect is far greater than sheer firepower. What Admiral Yi Sun-sin achieved at Myeongnyang was not just a military victory, it was the greatest tactical miracle in world military history. Today, this battle is taught like a textbook in naval academies across the globe. This is why many historians regard him as greater a warrior than even the British Admiral Horatio Nelson. There is a great lesson to be learned from this story. It's not about what we lack, but how we use what we have. Having fewer resources or facing a powerful enemy is never a reason to fail. With the right timing, the right environment, and firm determination, any great crisis can be turned into an advantage. Admiral Yi had only 13 ships, but he knew the sea, he knew the enemy's weakness, and above all, he was able to inspire confidence in his own army. Today, many business strategies and underdog companies that take down massive empires use these very same Yi Sun-sin tactics. The Myeongnyang Strait is still there today. Those roaring waves continue to teach us a lesson. Never give up, especially when the whole world stands against you. What do you think about this incredible fight by Admiral Yi? Was it his intellect or the help of nature that led to this victory? Comment your thoughts below. To learn more about such mysterious historical tactics and the fall of great empires, subscribe to this channel. We'll see you in the next video with another great strategy. Until then, goodbye. Thank you.